The autumn fog of 1891 had settled upon London with the persistence of an unwelcome guest, transforming the familiar streets into a labyrinth of amber-tinted shadows and muffled sounds. From the windows of our lodgings at 221B Baker Street, the gas lamps appeared as mere suggestions of light, their glow barely penetrating the thick, yellowish veil that had descended upon the city like a shroud. It was on such an evening that the most perplexing case of my long association with Mr. Sherlock Holmes began with what appeared to be nothing more than an agitated gentleman's fevered imagination. For 3 days, Holmes had been in one of his contemplative moods, sprawled upon the sofa in his purple dressing gown, his long, angular frame folded with the peculiar grace of a resting greyhound. His pale eyes were fixed upon the ceiling with an intensity that suggested he was reading some invisible manuscript written in the plaster above, while his fingers drummed a restless tattoo upon the arm of his chair. The cocaine bottle remained untouched upon the mantelpiece, a promising sign, but the Persian slipper that typically housed his tobacco lay empty beside him, and the air was thick with the acrid smoke of his pipe. The criminal classes of London had been disappointingly predictable of late, offering nothing more stimulating than the usual domestic disputes and petty thefts that Scotland Yard was perfectly capable of handling without consulting the services of a consulting detective. I'd observed this restless energy building in my friend for days, like steam pressure accumulating in a boiler, and I knew from experience that when relief finally came, it would arrive with explosive force. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, breaking a silence that had lasted the better part of an hour, "do you find it not remarkable that in a metropolis containing nearly 6 million souls, there exists not a single problem worthy of intellectual consideration?" I set down the copy of the British Medical Journal I'd been attempting to read, and regarded my friend with the mixture of amusement and concern that had become habitual during these periods of enforced idleness. "Surely Inspector Lestrade has cases enough to occupy your attention," I ventured, though I knew the response such a suggestion would provoke. "Lestrade!" Holmes sprang from the sofa with sudden energy, his dressing gown billowing behind him like the wings of some great bird of prey. "My dear Watson, Lestrade brings me nothing but the most pedestrian of mysteries. Where is the artistry? Where is the intellectual challenge that once made this profession worthy of complete devotion? I begin to fear that the criminal mind has grown as stagnant as the fog outside our windows." Before I could offer any words of consolation, the familiar tread of Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded upon the stairs, accompanied by what could only be described as the urgent stumbling of someone in considerable distress. Our landlady's knock was followed immediately by the appearance of a young man who burst into our sitting room with such violence that he nearly collided with Holmes, who had stepped forward to greet this unexpected visitor. The gentleman was perhaps 30 years of age, dressed in an expensive traveling suit of dark wool that bore the unmistakable signs of hasty journey through London's fog-shrouded streets. His face was pale with exhaustion and something that might have been terror, his hair disheveled, and his eyes darted about our sitting room with the frantic energy of a trapped animal seeking escape. In his trembling hand, he clutched what appeared to be a railway ticket, though it was so crumpled and damp that its details were barely legible. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, collapsing into the chair I hastily vacated for him. "Thank heaven you are here. I'm either going mad, or I've become the victim of the most impossible conspiracy ever conceived by the criminal mind." Holmes, his lethargy instantly forgotten, moved with the fluid precision of a cat stalking its prey. He poured a measure of brandy from the decanter upon the sideboard and pressed the glass into our visitor's shaking hands. "Drink this, sir, and compose yourself. You are safe within these walls. I perceive from the distinctive coal dust upon your cuffs and the particular pattern of mud upon your boots that you have come directly from one of our railway terminals. Euston Station, unless I am much mistaken." The young man downed the brandy in a single gulp and took a deep, shuddering breath. "You are quite correct, Mr. Holmes. I am Arthur Pemberton, no relation to the barrister, I hasten to add. and I have just experienced something that defies all rational explanation." Holmes settled into his chair, his pipe already between his lips, his eyes bright with the anticipation of intellectual challenge. "Pray continue, Mr. Pemberton. You mentioned a conspiracy of impossible nature." "Indeed, sir. I was to travel tonight on the midnight express to Edinburgh. Urgent business concerning my family's shipping interests in Glasgow. I'd reserved a private first-class compartment, number 7 in the sleeping car. I boarded the train precisely at 11:30, placed my luggage upon the rack, including a leather dispatch case containing documents of considerable commercial value, and stepped back onto the platform for no more than 2 minutes to purchase an evening paper." Pemberton paused, his eyes widening as if he still could not believe what he was about to relate. "When I returned to board the train, Mr. Holmes, my compartment had vanished." "Your luggage was stolen?" I interjected, my medical training immediately considering the shock such a loss might inflict upon a man's mental state. "No, Dr. Watson," Pemberton replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You misunderstand me. The compartment itself had disappeared. Where the door to number 7 had been, there was nothing but smooth, unbroken mahogany paneling. I counted the doors. Number 6 was there, number 8 was there, but number 7 had simply ceased to exist, and with it, my dispatch case containing documents worth nearly £50,000. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with intense concentration. "A most singular occurrence. Tell me, did you touch this wall where your compartment door should have been?" "I did, sir. The wood was solid, varnished, and cold to the touch." I ran immediately to find the conductor, a stout man with graying whiskers whom I had spoken with when I first boarded. But when I returned with him to the sleeping car, "He could find nothing amiss?" Holmes suggested. "Worse than that, Mr. Holmes. The conductor I brought back was an entirely different man. Younger, clean-shaven, with no recollection of ever having spoken with me. And he insisted that the train carried no sleeping car at all this evening, merely standard first-class compartments. He showed me the manifest to prove his point." Holmes rose and began to pace before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed in thought. "Most intriguing. And your ticket, Mr. Pemberton. I observe you still clutch it in your hand." Pemberton looked down at the crumpled paper with confusion. "Yes, but it has changed, Mr. Holmes. When I purchased it this afternoon, it clearly stated, first-class sleeping compartment, car A, berth 7. Now it reads merely, first-class seat, car B, number 23. The ticket agent insists this is what I purchased, but I know what I saw. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of fog-muffled traffic from the street below. Holmes had ceased his pacing and stood motionless before the hearth, his profile sharp against the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that particular note of satisfaction I had learned to associate with the commencement of a truly challenging case. "Watson," he said, turning to face me with eyes bright with intellectual hunger. "Fetch your coat and your service revolver. Mr. Pemberton, you have brought us a problem of extraordinary interest, a mystery that appears to violate the fundamental laws of physical reality. We must examine the scene of this impossible crime before the trail grows cold." "But surely," I protested, "if Mr. Pemberton's compartment has truly vanished, there will be nothing to examine." Holmes smiled. One of those thin, predatory smiles that promised revelation and justice in equal measure. "On the contrary, my dear fellow, if a railway compartment can disappear, leaving no trace of its existence, then we are dealing with either a criminal conspiracy of unprecedented sophistication or—" He paused, his eyes glittering with anticipation. "Or we are about to witness the application of methods so ingenious that they border upon the supernatural. In either case, the game is most decidedly afoot." Within minutes, we had descended to the fog-shrouded street, where Holmes hailed a hansom cab with his characteristic, imperious gesture. As we rattled through the darkened streets toward Euston Station, Our client huddled in the corner of the cab, still clutching his mysteriously altered ticket, while Holmes sat forward with the alertness of a hound that has caught the scent of its quarry. The station, when we reached it, was alive with the usual nocturnal bustle of Victorian London's great railway terminus. Porters wheeled laden trolleys across the vast concourse. Passengers hurried toward their platforms with the peculiar urgency that railway travel seemed to inspire. And the great engines hissed and steamed like iron dragons preparing for their nighttime journeys. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a sense that something had disturbed the normal rhythm of this temple to industrial progress. We were met at the platform entrance by a stout gentleman in a station master's uniform, his florid face creased with worry and his hands twisting his cap with nervous energy. "Mr. Holmes?" he inquired, though his tone suggested he harbored no doubt as to our identity. "I am Reginald Ashworth, station master. Thank Providence you've come so quickly. This is a most distressing business, most distressing indeed." "You are acquainted with Mr. Pemberton's extraordinary claim?" Holmes inquired, his keen eyes already scanning the station with that peculiar intensity that suggested he was cataloguing every detail for future analysis. "Indeed, sir, though I confess I scarce know what to make of it." The gentleman appeared at my office in a state of considerable agitation, insisting that we had somehow mislaid an entire railway compartment. At first, I assumed he had simply become confused in the fog. It happens more often than you might suppose. But when I examined our records... Ashworth's voice trailed off, and he shook his head with bewilderment. "Mr. Holmes, according to our booking ledgers, no sleeping car was attached to tonight's midnight express, yet I distinctly remember authorizing the coupling of Car A to the train this afternoon. I have the paperwork in my own handwriting, but now the official manifest shows no such car was ever scheduled." Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally, a sign I'd learned to recognize as indicating his intense interest. "Most illuminating. And the train itself? Where does it stand now?" "Platform 7, sir. We've held it pending investigation, though the passengers are becoming increasingly vocal about the delay. The railway company is most anxious to resolve this matter with minimum scandal." "Then let us examine this phantom compartment," Holmes declared, striding toward the platform with renewed energy. "Watson, bring your medical bag. I suspect we may have need of your professional services before this night is through." As we approached the midnight express, I could see that it was indeed a train of unusual configuration. The first-class carriages gleamed with polished brass and mahogany, their windows glowing warmly in the station's gaslight. Yet there was something subtly wrong about the arrangement, a discontinuity in the line of the cars that suggested something had been removed, leaving the remaining carriages to be coupled together in a manner that concealed the gap. Holmes paused before boarding, his eyes traveling the length of the train with mathematical precision. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, "the spacing between the third and fourth carriages. Note how the coupling appears freshly connected, and see here." He knelt beside the track, producing his magnifying glass to examine something in the gravel. Fresh oil stains and the distinctive marks left by the wheels of a railway car that has been recently uncoupled. Rising, he brushed the dust from his knees and turned to Ashworth. "I require a complete manifest of all passengers who boarded this train, their destinations, and the precise location of their accommodations. Additionally, I need to speak with every member of the train's crew who was on duty during the boarding process." "I shall have that information compiled immediately," Ashworth promised, clearly relieved to have specific tasks to occupy him. Holmes nodded his approval before mounting the steps of the nearest carriage. "Come, Watson. Let us see what secrets this iron serpent may be concealing. Mr. Pemberton, you will accompany us and point out precisely where your vanished compartment should have been." As we entered the first-class carriage, I was struck by the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to pervade the narrow corridor. The gas lamps flickered with unusual intensity, casting dancing shadows upon the polished wood paneling, and there was a faint but persistent odor in the air, something chemical and unfamiliar that made my medical instincts prickle with unease. Pemberton led us down the corridor, counting doors with the mechanical precision of a man trying to convince himself of his own sanity. "Here," he said, stopping before a section of wall that appeared identical to every other panel in the carriage. "This is where the door to compartment 7 should be. I'm certain of it." Holmes approached the wall with the delicate care of a surgeon examining a patient. He ran his long fingers along the wood grain, tapped the panels with his knuckles, and pressed his ear against the surface as if listening for some hidden sound. Finally, he produced his magnifying glass and examined every inch of the paneling with minute attention. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Watson, observe the wood grain here. Do you notice anything unusual about its pattern?" I studied the paneling as directed, though I confess the significance of Holmes' observation escaped me. "It appears consistent with the rest of the carriage," I admitted. "Precisely," Holmes exclaimed with satisfaction. "Too consistent. The grain flows in an unbroken pattern across this entire section, yet if there had never been a door here, we should expect to see the natural irregularities that occur when individual panels are fitted together. This wall, gentlemen, has been reconstructed with extraordinary skill, but not with perfect success." He turned to face us, his eyes bright with the fire of discovery. "Mr. Pemberton's compartment did not vanish, Watson. It was removed, physically detached from this train and replaced with false paneling so skillfully crafted that it would fool casual observation. We are dealing with a criminal enterprise of unprecedented audacity and sophistication." "But why?" Pemberton asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What could justify such an elaborate deception?" Holmes's smile was grim. "That, my dear sir, is precisely what we must determine. But I can tell you this. Whatever was in that dispatch case of yours was valuable enough to warrant the theft of an entire railway compartment. We are not dealing with common thieves, but with criminal masterminds who possess resources and technical knowledge that rival those of the railway companies themselves." As if summoned by his words, the shrill whistle of the train's engine echoed through the station, followed by the conductor's cry of "All aboard!" The midnight express was preparing to depart, and with it any remaining evidence of the impossible crime that had been committed within its iron confines. Holmes glanced at his pocket watch and made a swift decision. "Watson, we travel north tonight. Whatever secrets this train carries, they will not escape us. The game has begun, and I intend to see it played to its conclusion." As the great engine began to move, pulling us out into the fog-shrouded darkness of the London night, I could not help but reflect that we were embarking upon what would prove to be one of the most extraordinary cases in our long partnership. The mystery of the Midnight Express had begun, and somewhere ahead in the darkness, a criminal conspiracy of unprecedented boldness awaited our investigation. The iron wheels sang their rhythmic song upon the rails, carrying us northward through the night toward a confrontation with forces that had dared to make the impossible seem real. Yet I had complete confidence that Sherlock Holmes, with his unparalleled powers of observation and deduction, would ultimately restore order to this chaos of vanished compartments and altered realities. The hunt was on, and the Midnight Express had become our chariot of justice, racing through the darkness toward the truth that lay hidden in the shadows of this most perplexing mystery. The rhythmic clatter of wheels upon iron rails provided a hypnotic accompaniment to our investigation as the Midnight Express carried us northward through the fog-shrouded countryside. Within the narrow confines of the first-class carriage, Holmes had transformed our mobile prison into an impromptu laboratory, producing from his coat pocket a leather case containing various scientific instruments I recognized from our Baker Street lodgings. The chemical odor I had detected earlier still lingered in the corridor, and I observed Holmes sampling the air with a small glass vial, his nostrils flaring with the concentration of a bloodhound following a scent. "Watson," he murmured, sealing the vial with a cork stopper. "This particular aroma suggests the recent application of a fast-drying varnish combined with traces of chloral hydrate. a substance more commonly associated with rendering individuals unconscious than with railway maintenance. He produced a magnifying glass and began examining the reconstructed wall panel with methodical precision, running his fingers along the wood grain while making soft exclamations of discovery. After several minutes of this careful scrutiny, Holmes straightened and withdrew a yellow tape measure from his greatcoat. The internal dimensions of this carriage, when compared to standard railway blueprints, reveal a discrepancy of exactly 6 feet in length. The missing space has been concealed behind this false bulkhead, installed with considerable skill, but not without leaving traces for the trained observer. Pemberton, who had been watching these proceedings with growing agitation, clutched his altered ticket more tightly. But how could such modifications be accomplished without detection? Surely the railway authorities would notice such extensive alterations to their rolling stock. Holmes paused in his measurements, his eyes gleaming with that particular intensity that indicated a significant deduction. On the contrary, Mr. Pemberton, I suspect the modifications were temporary, executed during the brief interval of your absence, and designed to be reversed once the train had departed. We are dealing with individuals possessing both extraordinary technical expertise and access to railway facilities that would allow such audacious manipulation. Station Master Ashworth's documents lay spread across a small folding table, and Holmes now turned his attention to these papers with renewed focus. His long fingers traced patterns across the passenger manifest, connecting names and destinations with penciled lines that formed an intricate web of relationships. After 20 minutes of concentrated study, he looked up with an expression of grim satisfaction. Observe, Watson, the pattern of booking cancellations for this particular journey. 7 passengers withdrew their reservations within the past 48 hours, each citing urgent personal matters. Furthermore, 5 individuals originally booked into compartments adjacent to number 7 have been mysteriously relocated throughout different carriages without apparent complaint or explanation. The implications of this revelation were staggering. You believe the entire area surrounding Pemberton's compartment was deliberately cleared. More than cleared, Watson. Orchestrated with military precision. We are witnessing the execution of a plan that required weeks of preparation and resources, suggesting involvement by individuals of considerable influence within the railway industry itself. Our conversation was interrupted by the appearance of the corridor door sliding open to admit a young, clean-shaven conductor whose uniform appeared slightly too large for his slender frame. His eyes darted nervously toward the section of false paneling as he requested our tickets, and I noticed a distinct tremor in his voice that immediately attracted Holmes's attention. "You are recently transferred to the Midnight Express," Holmes observed, studying the man's equipment with characteristic precision. "Your ticket punch is of the older dual-hole variety used on suburban lines, not the single-star punch standard for mainline service. Where, might I inquire, is the senior conductor with grey whiskers whom Mr. Pemberton encountered earlier?" The young man's face paled visibly. "Mr. Henderson took ill just before departure, sir. Sudden stomach complaint. I was called in as emergency replacement." Before Holmes could pursue this line of inquiry further, the door to compartment 6 opened with violent force, revealing a formidable woman of perhaps 60 years, dressed in severe mourning attire. She leaned heavily upon an ebony cane topped with a silver wolf's head, her aristocratic features arranged in an expression of supreme displeasure. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the engine's rumble like a blade through silk. "I paid for quiet passage, not interrogations in the corridor." Holmes tipped his hat with practiced courtesy, but I observed his eyes narrow with sudden interest. As the woman retreated into her compartment, slamming the door with emphatic finality, my friend dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to the floorboards beneath where she had stood. "Watson," he whispered, his voice vibrating with excitement, "the rhythm is wrong. These wheels are not singing the same song as the others." Holmes remained motionless upon the floor for several heartbeats, his ear pressed against the polished wood with the intensity of a safecracker listening for the tumblers of a lock. When he finally rose, his angular features bore that expression of grim satisfaction I had learned to associate with significant discoveries. "The acoustic evidence is conclusive, Watson," he announced quietly. "The rhythmic percussion beneath this section produces a distinctly lower pitch than the corresponding sounds elsewhere in the carriage. Such variation indicates a substantial alteration in the chassis' sprung weight. We are not standing over empty space, but above something of considerable mass that has been ingeniously integrated into the train structure." Before I could respond, the corridor door slid open to admit a broad-shouldered gentleman in railway inspector's uniform, his mustache waxed to military precision. Station Master Ashworth followed nervously in his wake, wringing his hands with evident distress. "Mr. Holmes," Ashworth began apologetically. "This is Mr. Aldous Finch, the company's traveling inspector. He has joined us at Camden to assist in resolving this delicate matter." Finch regarded us with cool appraisal, his eyes lingering disapprovingly on Holmes's unconventional investigative posture. "I must advise you, gentlemen, that the London and North Western Railway cannot acknowledge any unauthorized modifications to its rolling stock. Our documentation clearly indicates this carriage conforms to standard specifications." Holmes straightened, brushing dust from his coat with deliberate care. "Your records may be impeccable, Mr. Finch, yet the physical evidence suggests otherwise. However, I shall endeavor to conduct my investigation with minimal disruption to your schedule." As Finch withdrew with obvious reluctance, Holmes turned his attention to the door of compartment 6. His knock produced an immediate response. The imperious voice of Lady Augusta Thorne demanding we cease our disturbances. Holmes, however, employed his most persuasive tone. "Lady Augusta, I am investigating potential structural irregularities that may affect passenger safety. Might you have observed any unusual sounds during the boarding process?" The door opened reluctantly, revealing the severe countenance we had encountered earlier. "Now that you mention it," she admitted grudgingly. "There was considerable mechanical noise shortly after I boarded. Rhythmic thumping followed by hydraulic hissing. The conductor assured me it was routine brake testing, though he seemed remarkably anxious to hurry me inside and draw my blinds." "Most illuminating," Holmes murmured. "And did you observe anyone supervising this testing?" "A gentleman in grey, carrying rolled blueprints. He smelled strongly of peppermint." She paused, studying Holmes with sharp intelligence. "I assume this relates to the missing compartment that young man claims to have lost?" Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You are remarkably well informed, madam." "I make it my business to observe fellow travelers, Mr. Holmes, particularly when they conduct clandestine investigations in railway corridors." After Lady Augusta withdrew, Holmes knelt to examine something glittering in the carpet fibers near her threshold. Using his penknife, he carefully extracted several translucent flakes, holding them to the gaslight for inspection. "Mica, Watson," he announced, producing a small envelope to preserve the specimens. "Sheet mica, used primarily for high-temperature electrical insulation. Combined with the hydraulic sounds Lady Augusta described, this suggests the installation of powered apparatus requiring both thermal protection and significant mechanical force." He pressed his palm against the false paneling. "Warm to the touch, despite the night's chill. Whatever lies behind this wall is generating heat and consuming considerable power." As if summoned by his words, the corridor's gas lamps flickered violently, dimming to blue pinpricks before flaring with renewed intensity. The train lurched around a sharp curve, throwing us against the paneling. "The power draw," Holmes hissed, gripping the brass handrail. "They are operating the device. Observe how the lights dim when the apparatus draws current. This suggests direct connection to the train's electrical system." Pemberton, who had watched these proceedings with growing anxiety, finally spoke. "Mr. Holmes, are you suggesting my compartment has been converted into some sort of machine?" "More than converted, Mr. Pemberton. replaced entirely by a sophisticated apparatus requiring substantial power and producing considerable heat. The question remains, what is its purpose, and why was your particular journey selected for this audacious substitution? Holmes moved toward the vestibule connecting our carriage to the next. We must examine the exterior coupling mechanisms, Watson. If my deductions prove correct, we shall find evidence of recent modifications that will reveal the true scope of this conspiracy. The cold night air struck us as we stepped onto the platform between cars, fog rushing past in ghostly tendrils. Holmes leaned outward with alarming boldness, studying the undercarriage as it thundered through the darkness. When he returned, his expression carried both triumph and deep concern. Fresh tool marks upon the coupling hardware, Watson, and the suspension sits lower than standard configuration. We are dealing with criminals possessing both extraordinary technical expertise and access to railway facilities that would permit such extensive modifications. He paused, his keen eyes reflecting the train's lamps. The game has grown considerably more complex, my dear fellow. We are not merely pursuing thieves, but confronting an organization capable of converting an entire railway compartment into a mobile apparatus of unknown but undoubtedly sinister purpose. The compartment's confines seemed to contract around us as Holmes arranged his collection of evidence with methodical precision. The maker fragments glinting like crystalline secrets in the gaslight, the chemical samples sealed within their glass vials, and his detailed sketches of the coupling modifications spread across the narrow table. The rhythmic percussion of wheels upon rails provided a hypnotic counterpoint to our investigation, while outside the windows, the fog-shrouded countryside rushed past in ghostly procession. "Mr. Pemberton," Holmes began, his pipe drawing with deliberate slowness, "the sophistication of this criminal enterprise demands complete transparency regarding your stolen documents. The time for discretion has passed. Lives may depend upon absolute candor." Our client's hands trembled as he reached for his brandy glass. The papers contained engineering specifications for revolutionary electrical propulsion systems designed for marine vessels, Mr. Holmes. My family's firm has spent 5 years developing battery-powered motors capable of driving ships without coal or steam. The patents represent not merely commercial advantage, but potential transformation of naval warfare itself. Holmes's eyes sharpened with intense focus. Electrical propulsion for warships, most illuminating, and who possessed knowledge of these specifications beyond your immediate circle? Only our chief engineer in Glasgow and the patent solicitor in Edinburgh, Pemberton replied, his voice dropping to barely audible levels. The Admiralty had expressed preliminary interest, suggesting possible government contracts worth millions. Tomorrow's presentation was to determine whether the Royal Navy would adopt our technology. Before Holmes could respond, a sharp knock interrupted our conference. Inspector Finch entered, accompanied by a distinguished gentleman whose silver hair and expensive traveling attire marked him as a person of considerable status. His weathered features bore the scholarly intensity of academic pursuit, yet his eyes held the sharp calculation of one accustomed to navigating dangerous waters. "Gentlemen," Finch announced with poorly concealed satisfaction, "Professor Edmund Blackwood of the Royal Society. He possesses information that may illuminate your investigation considerably." Blackwood settled into the remaining seat with careful movements. "Mr. Holmes, I could not avoid overhearing portions of your inquiry. I believe I comprehend both the nature of what has been stolen and the extraordinary measures employed in its acquisition." Holmes leaned forward, his entire being focused upon this unexpected revelation. "Please continue, Professor." 6 months passed, the Admiralty commissioned secret research concerning electrical propulsion's military applications. Multiple engineering firms developed independent solutions, with the Pemberton patents representing the most promising approach. However, 3 weeks ago, another engineer working on similar specifications disappeared while traveling by rail between Manchester and Liverpool. His compartment was discovered empty, his documents vanished, and the railway company insisted he had never boarded despite multiple witnesses. The implications transformed our investigation entirely. Holmes accepted the leather portfolio Blackwood produced, scanning its contents with rapid intensity. The pattern is unmistakable, Watson. We confront an organized network employing identical methodology against specific targets. The vanishing compartment represents not an isolated incident, but a perfected technique for industrial espionage. But the apparatus you discovered, I interjected, struggling to comprehend the conspiracy's scope. What purpose does it serve if the documents have already been stolen? Holmes rose to pace the narrow confines, his mind clearly racing ahead of his words. An excellent question. The device's continued operation suggests its function extends beyond simple concealment. Consider the power requirements, the heat generation, the hydraulic mechanisms Lady Augusta described. These characteristics indicate active processing rather than passive storage. He turned to face Blackwood with sudden intensity. Professor, could such apparatus be designed to photograph documents at high speed using electrical principles? Blackwood's expression darkened considerably. Recent advances in electro-optical technology have made rapid document reproduction feasible, though the equipment required would be substantial and consume enormous power. If your deductions prove accurate, we face a mobile copying station capable of duplicating sensitive materials during transit. Which explains the elaborate deception perfectly, Holmes concluded grimly. The thieves require time to photograph the documents before discovery occurs. By creating the illusion that the compartment never existed, they gain precious hours during which the victim questions his sanity rather than alerting authorities. The train's whistle screamed through the darkness as we thundered past a station platform where a solitary figure stood motionless beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his face concealed in shadow. Holmes moved to the window, watching the figure recede into the night. "We are being observed, gentlemen," he announced quietly, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "The architects of this conspiracy monitor our investigation, which suggests they consider us a genuine threat to their operations. The game has grown considerably more dangerous, but also more promising. For when criminals begin to fear detection, they inevitably make the mistakes that ensure their downfall." The implications of Professor Blackwood's revelation settled over our compartment like a shroud, transforming what had appeared to be an isolated crime into something far more sinister. Holmes remained motionless at the window, his angular profile etched against the rushing darkness, as his mind clearly assembled the scattered fragments into a coherent pattern of industrial espionage operating on a national scale. "The sophistication of this enterprise," Holmes began, turning from the window with renewed intensity, "suggests coordination between multiple criminal elements, corrupted railway personnel, technical specialists, and individuals with access to sensitive commercial intelligence. We are not confronting mere thieves, but a network capable of systematic attacks upon Britain's industrial secrets." He resumed, his seat producing his notebook to record the emerging connections. "Professor, your mention of patent solicitors handling these specifications raises a crucial question. Which firm represents Mr. Pemberton's interests in London?" "Blackthorne and Associates in Holborn," Pemberton replied promptly. "They have handled our family's patent matters for decades. My father trusted them implicitly." Holmes's eyes sharpened with unmistakable significance. "Most illuminating. Watson, observe how the threads of conspiracy begin to weave together: access to patent documentation, advanced knowledge of travel arrangements, and the technical expertise required for such elaborate deceptions." Before I could respond, the compartment door slid open to admit the young conductor whose nervous demeanor had previously attracted our suspicion. His face bore a sheen of perspiration despite the evening's chill, and his hands trembled visibly as he fumbled with his ticket punch. "Your full name and employment history," Holmes requested with deceptive mildness, though his tone carried unmistakable authority. "Timothy Graves, sir," the conductor stammered, his voice barely steady. 3 months with the railway company. previously employed in clerical work. Holmes extended his hand for the ticket punch, examining it through his magnifying glass, while Graves shifted uncomfortably. This instrument bears distinctive wear patterns consistent with document perforation rather than standard railway tickets. You possess secondary employment involving official papers. The young man's composure cracked visibly. I assist with evening clerical duties at my uncle's law firm, sir. Merely copying and filing, nothing irregular. And this firm's name? Blackthorne and Associates, sir. Patent solicitors. The revelation struck like lightning. Holmes rose with calculated deliberation, his considerable height suddenly dominating the confined space. Mr. Graves, the time for deception has passed. Your position has become extraordinarily precarious, and complete honesty represents your sole path toward avoiding serious criminal charges. Graves collapsed against the corridor wall, his facade shattering entirely. I swear I knew nothing of theft or conspiracy, Mr. Holmes. I was instructed merely to report passenger manifests, which compartments contained business travelers, what documents they might carry. They told me it concerned legitimate commercial intelligence. And who provided these instructions? A gentleman calling himself Mr. Sterling, distinguished appearance with a distinctive scar across his left palm. He paid me £20 for information about tonight's passengers, claiming it involved routine business negotiations. Holmes' expression grew grimmer. The senior conductor, Mr. Henderson, his sudden illness was arranged. They offered him £50 to feign stomach complaint and allow my substitution. Graves admitted miserably. Henderson believed it concerned railway labor disputes, not industrial espionage. Please, sir, I am merely a fool who accepted money without questioning its source. The mechanical hum we had detected earlier intensified suddenly, accompanied by a distinct vibration through the floorboards. Holmes moved to the false paneling, pressing his ear against the wood with intense concentration. The apparatus operates again, he announced quietly. They are completing the duplication process. Watson, your revolver remains accessible. My hand moved instinctively to confirm the weapon's presence. Ready, Holmes? He turned to Inspector Finch with renewed urgency. Inspector, I require immediate access to the conductor's service compartment. The control mechanisms for this elaborate deception must be housed within the carriage's structural framework. As we moved stealthily toward the rear of the carriage, the train's whistle shrieked through the darkness, followed by the grinding of brakes. Through the windows, I glimpsed the lights of a small station approaching through the fog. They mean to abandon the operation, Holmes declared grimly. Whatever evidence remains within that hidden compartment, they intend to remove it before we can intervene. Gentlemen, the moment of confrontation approaches, and with it, our opportunity to expose this entire criminal enterprise. The train shuddered to a halt, steam hissing into the night air as figures moved purposefully along the platform outside. The game had reached its critical juncture, and I knew that whatever transpired in the next few minutes would determine whether justice prevailed or the conspirators escaped with their stolen secrets into the concealing darkness. The nameless country station materialized from the fog like a stage set arranged for clandestine drama, its few gas lamps casting wavering circles of amber light through the thick mist that seemed to muffle even the rhythmic hissing of the locomotive. Holmes pressed himself against the corridor window, his keen eyes tracking three figures who emerged from the shadows with the disciplined precision of military operatives rather than casual railway workers. "Observe their coordination, Watson," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the settling steam. "They maintain precise intervals, communicate through hand signals, and approach with tactical awareness. We confront professionals, not mere industrial thieves." Inspector Finch moved to join us, his earlier skepticism transformed into genuine alarm as he consulted his pocket watch. "This station permits only a 2-minute water stop. No passengers should board or disembark at this hour, yet these men clearly await our arrival." Holmes withdrew from the window with characteristic decisiveness. "Then we must act with corresponding precision. Watson, position yourself at the rear vestibule. Inspector, secure the forward entrance. We shall observe their methodology before intervention. As I took my assigned position, revolver concealed but ready, I heard the distinctive sound of metal striking metal beneath our carriage floor. The mechanical humming that had pervaded our investigation intensified dramatically, accompanied by hydraulic hissing that suggested the hidden apparatus was being prepared for extraction. Through the vestibule window, I observed the leader of the group, a tall man whose expensive greatcoat and cultured bearing contrasted sharply with his companion's working attire. From his coat pocket, he produced not standard railway equipment, but an elaborate key mechanism that he inserted into what appeared to be an ordinary rivet in the carriage's exterior paneling. The effect was immediate and startling. A section of the carriage's side wall slid smoothly aside with mechanical precision, revealing not the expected passenger compartment, but a compact, fully equipped laboratory bathed in red photographic light. Within this hidden workspace, 2 technicians labored over chemical baths and document copying apparatus, while a third man systematically photographed the contents of what I recognized as Pemberton's dispatch case. By heaven, Inspector Finch whispered, his professional outrage overcoming discretion. They've integrated an entire espionage laboratory into the train structure, the engineering required for such modifications. Holmes gestured for silence, his attention fixed upon a heavy wooden crate being wheeled toward our carriage on a porter's trolley. The power source, Watson. Observe the cables. They connect directly to that apparatus. The train's electrical system could never sustain such demands. The crate was positioned beneath the carriage, and I heard the distinctive sound of heavy electrical connections being established. The hidden laboratory's activity intensified immediately, with rapid clicking sounds suggesting high-speed photographic reproduction. They require only minutes to complete their work, Holmes observed grimly. The entire operation has been rehearsed to military precision. Note how the leader, undoubtedly our Mr. Sterling, coordinates the timing while maintaining watch for interference. Before I could respond, young Graves appeared at the corridor's far end, his face pale with terror. Holmes beckoned him forward with urgent gestures. You will proceed onto the platform as though performing routine duties, Holmes commanded in barely audible tones. Give no sign of our presence, but observe who approaches the service compartment. Your cooperation may yet preserve your freedom. Graves nodded frantically and stepped into the fog-shrouded night. Through the window, I watched him approach the criminal operation with convincing nonchalance, even as the leader's attention sharpened with suspicious awareness. The exchange that followed was swift and practiced. The empty dispatch case was passed out for disposal, while an identical leather satchel, presumably containing the photographic copies, was secured within Sterling's greatcoat. The leader examined several documents briefly under a shielded lantern, his satisfaction evident even at our distance. Suddenly, the station's signal arm dropped with a metallic clank, indicating clearance for departure. The criminals moved with urgent efficiency to seal the hidden compartment, their hydraulic mechanisms hissing as the false wall slid back into position. The moment approaches, Watson, Holmes declared, checking his revolver with practiced movements. They have succeeded in their primary objective, but evidence of their methods remains. We must prevent their departure while securing proof of this extraordinary conspiracy. As the locomotive's whistle shrieked through the darkness and steam began building for departure, I realized we stood at the crucial juncture of our investigation. The criminals had demonstrated capabilities that bordered on the supernatural, yet Holmes's methodical analysis had revealed the mechanical reality behind their impossible deceptions. The confrontation that would determine the case's outcome was about to begin, and I prepared myself for whatever revelations the fog-shrouded platform might yet conceal. The locomotive's whistle shrieked through the fog-shrouded night as Holmes burst from the vestibule with the controlled violence of a predator finally unleashed. Steam billowed across the platform in ghostly tendrils, wreathing the three conspirators in an ethereal haze that seemed to render their criminal enterprise appropriately phantasmagorical. I followed immediately, revolver drawn, while Inspector Finch emerged from the forward entrance to complete our tactical encirclement. Sterling turned with remarkable composure, his scarred left palm clearly visible as he adjusted his greatcoat. Rather than flee or draw a weapon, he regarded Holmes with the calculating assessment of a chess master confronting an unexpected gambit. "Mr. Holmes," he acknowledged with cultured civility that seemed grotesquely inappropriate given our circumstances. "I had anticipated your eventual involvement, though perhaps not with such dramatic timing. You interrupt what is merely a private commercial transaction." Holmes advanced with measured steps, his keen eyes never leaving Sterling's face. "I interrupt a sophisticated conspiracy involving industrial espionage, theft of naval specifications, and the unauthorized conversion of railway property into a mobile espionage laboratory. The time for pretense has concluded, sir." "Indeed?" Sterling's eyebrows rose with feigned surprise. "You possess remarkable imagination, though I fear your evidence remains circumstantial at best." Holmes produced the mica fragments from his pocket, holding them to catch the gaslight. "Sheet mica for electrical insulation, combined with silver nitrate photographic chemicals and hydraulic tool marks upon the coupling hardware. Your hidden laboratory has left material traces throughout this carriage, Mr. Sterling. Moreover, young Mr. Graves has provided detailed testimony regarding your recruitment methods and advanced knowledge of passenger manifests." Sterling's composure wavered fractionally as his hand moved instinctively to conceal the distinctive scar Holmes had mentioned. "You comprehend only fragments of this enterprise, Holmes. The organization I represent operates far beyond your provincial jurisdiction. Tonight's work represents merely one operation among dozens targeting Britain's industrial secrets." The admission struck like lightning. Holmes's expression grew grave with the implications. "Then you confirm the existence of a coordinated network systematically acquiring patent specifications and commercial innovations." "I confirm that your interference tonight may prove more costly than you anticipate," Sterling replied coldly. "The individuals who finance our operations possess influence extending to the highest levels of government and industry." Before Holmes could respond, a sharp crack echoed from the darkness beyond the station's illuminated perimeter. One of Sterling's technicians cried out, clutching his shoulder where a dark stain spread rapidly across his working clothes. From the shadows, a muzzle flash revealed the position of a concealed marksman. "Sniper!" I shouted, my medical training immediately assessing the wound's severity. "Holmes, take cover." But my friend remained standing, his eyes scanning the darkness with intense concentration. "The shooter withdraws already, Watson." This was not assassination, but demonstration. A warning that Sterling's organization eliminates those who might compromise operations through testimony. Sterling's face had grown ashen, not from fear, but from the terrible realization of his position. "You have saved my life tonight, gentlemen, yet simultaneously ensured my death. My employers do not tolerate failure or capture." The wounded technician was attempting to flee toward the goods yard, but Inspector Finch proved surprisingly agile, blocking the escape route while producing his warrant card. "Railway police, you are detained pending investigation." Suddenly, Sterling moved with explosive decisiveness. He hurled the leather dispatch case directly at Inspector Finch, who instinctively raised his arms to catch it. Simultaneously, Sterling darted sideways into the billowing steam, snatching a signal lamp and hurling it against the platform's wooden planking. Glass shattered, oil ignited, and startled cries erupted from all directions. "Watson, cover the rear exit," Holmes commanded, already pursuing Sterling into the chaos of flame and smoke. The chase led through the station's maze of freight platforms and abandoned rolling stock, where fog and industrial shadows created a labyrinth of concealment. Sterling moved with practiced familiarity through this terrain, clearly having rehearsed escape routes for precisely such contingencies. Holmes matched his pace with remarkable athleticism, his long legs covering ground with efficient strides. As they approached the goods yard's edge, Sterling leaped onto a slowly moving freight train, grasping the iron ladder of a coal wagon with desperate strength. "The junction!" Finch shouted, arriving breathless beside me. "We can intercept at the signal crossing 2 miles ahead." But Holmes was already climbing aboard the moving train, his lean frame silhouetted against the night sky as he pursued Sterling across the swaying rooftops. The two figures disappeared into the darkness, locked in a deadly chase atop iron carriages, hurtling through the fog-shrouded countryside at increasing speed. Inspector Finch commandeered the Midnight Express's locomotive, ordering immediate pursuit along the parallel track. As our engine surged forward in desperate chase, I stared into the darkness where Holmes battled not merely a criminal, but the advance agent of a conspiracy that threatened Britain's industrial supremacy itself. The case had transformed from impossible mystery to deadly pursuit, and the outcome now depended upon Holmes's physical courage matching his legendary intellect in the perilous confrontation racing through the night ahead. The pursuing locomotive thundered through the fog-shrouded countryside with mechanical fury, its pistons driving with relentless determination as we closed the distance with the freight train carrying Holmes and Sterling into the darkness ahead. Through the swirling mist, I glimpsed the deadly drama unfolding atop the coal wagons, two figures locked in mortal combat across the swaying rooftops, while the English countryside rushed past in ghostly procession beneath the obscured moon. Inspector Finch gripped the cab's handrail with white-knuckled intensity, shouting instructions to the engineer over the cacophony of steam and grinding wheels. "Maximum speed. We must reach Ashford Junction before that freight clears the crossing." Through my field glasses, I observed Holmes maintaining precarious balance atop a coal wagon while Sterling retreated toward the train's rear. But my friend's tactical instincts proved superior to my own. What I had interpreted as retreat was actually Sterling leading Holmes into a carefully prepared trap. Two additional figures emerged from concealed positions among the cargo, both wielding heavy iron coupling bars as improvised weapons. Holmes found himself surrounded on the narrow rooftop with deadly drops on either side and armed opponents blocking both advance and retreat. Yet rather than panic, he assessed the situation with characteristic precision. As the nearest assailant swung his coupling bar in a vicious arc, Holmes ducked beneath the blow with acrobatic grace, using the man's momentum to propel him sideways off the wagon's edge. The criminal's scream was swallowed by the locomotive's whistle, as Holmes immediately pivoted to confront Sterling and the remaining attacker. "The junction signal shows red," our engineer cursed with professional alarm. "That freight runs without authorization. They've bypassed the safety interlocks." Through the darkness ahead, I perceived the approaching convergence where our parallel tracks merged into a single line. The freight train showed no signs of reducing speed, while our own locomotive hurtled forward on what would prove a catastrophic collision course unless one train yielded priority. The freight engineer finally recognized the mortal danger, applying emergency brakes with a screech of tortured metal that sent cascades of sparks from locked wheels. The sudden deceleration proved catastrophic for those fighting atop the swaying wagons. Sterling lost his footing entirely, sliding toward the wagon's edge with arms flailing desperately, while his remaining accomplice was thrown forward against a ventilation shaft with bone-crushing force. Holmes lunged forward with remarkable presence of mind, grasping Sterling's wrist with one hand, while maintaining his own precarious grip on an iron handrail with the other. For a suspended moment, the criminal mastermind dangled above the rushing rails, his earlier composure completely extinguished by primal terror. "Complete cooperation!" Sterling screamed above the mechanical chaos, his sophisticated facade cracking entirely. "I'll provide everything, names, locations, the entire network structure. They meant to eliminate me regardless of tonight's success." Holmes hauled Sterling upward with considerable effort, dragging him back onto the wagon's roof just as both trains shuddered to emergency stops, mere yards before the junction's convergence point. The silence that followed seemed almost supernatural after the previous cacophony, broken only by hissing steam and the acrid smell of overheated brake shoes permeating the night air. Holmes descended from the freight wagon with Sterling firmly in custody, both men begrimed with coal dust, yet visibly relieved to have survived their near-fatal confrontation. "Watson," my friend called as I rushed to meet them, "Mr. Sterling has experienced a remarkable change of perspective regarding his criminal associates. It appears that loyalty within this organization flows in only one direction." Sterling collapsed against the wagon's side, his arrogance completely extinguished. "They promised security and wealth, but delivered only fear and betrayal. The network recruits from patent offices, railway companies, even government ministries. Tonight's operation represents merely one thread in a web spanning the entire nation." Inspector Finch produced handcuffs with grim satisfaction. "Then you will provide complete testimony regarding this conspiracy's structure and personnel. Your cooperation may yet preserve your life, though it cannot absolve your crimes." As we secured the prisoner and began examining the freight train's hidden cargo, including the portable electrical generator and dismantled photographic equipment, Holmes's expression remained thoughtful despite our apparent victory. "The scope of this enterprise exceeds our initial calculations, Watson. We have uncovered not merely industrial espionage, but a systematic assault upon Britain's technological supremacy orchestrated by forces possessing resources and influence at the highest levels." The first grey light of dawn began bleeding into the eastern sky as our locomotive reversed toward the station where the midnight express waited. The fog was lifting, revealing the English countryside in all its pastoral tranquility, a stark contrast to the industrial violence we had witnessed. "Sterling's testimony will prove invaluable," Holmes continued, "yet the true heart of this conspiracy remains concealed within that mobile laboratory. The vanishing compartment was merely the visible manifestation of far deeper criminal innovation. We must examine every component of their apparatus before the trail grows cold." As we approached the station, I reflected upon how this impossible mystery had evolved into a case of national importance. The network Sterling described threatened not merely individual patents, but Britain's entire industrial foundation. Yet I maintained complete confidence that Holmes's relentless pursuit of truth would ultimately expose every thread of this elaborate criminal web, no matter how deeply its roots extended into respectable society. The grey light of dawn transformed the rural station into a scene of methodical investigation as Holmes directed the systematic examination of the criminal apparatus that had been concealed within the Midnight Express with such audacious sophistication. Railway engineers worked alongside Scotland Yard specialists. Their combined expertise focused upon documenting every aspect of the mobile laboratory that had enabled such an unprecedented conspiracy against British industrial secrets. The hidden laboratory revealed Holmes approached the false paneling with the reverence of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. The hydraulic mechanisms that had enabled the compartment's transformation were revealed in their full mechanical elegance, pistons and gears arranged with Germanic precision, designed to convert a luxury sleeping berth into a fully functional espionage facility within minutes. "Observe the engineering sophistication, Watson," Holmes murmured, running his fingers along the shock-absorbing mounts that secured the photographic equipment. Every component designed to operate flawlessly, despite the constant motion and vibration of railway travel. We confront criminals possessing technical expertise that rivals our finest manufacturing establishments. The compartment's interior was a marvel of criminal innovation. Chemical baths were secured in gimbaled containers to prevent spillage during transit, while photographic lenses mounted on adjustable frames could accommodate documents of varying sizes. An elaborate electrical system drew power from connections to the train's lighting circuits, supplemented by the portable generator we had discovered aboard the freight train. Professor Blackwood examined the optical apparatus with professional fascination despite his obvious moral outrage. "The photographic quality is exceptional," he observed, studying the precision ground lenses. Combined with their rapid development chemicals, technical drawings could be reproduced with perfect fidelity and returned to their owners within hours, leaving no evidence of theft beyond the brief period of the compartment's apparent disappearance. Sterling's calculated revelations. Under Holmes's methodical questioning, Sterling provided carefully measured information about the conspiracy's structure, though I detected in his manner the calculation of a man revealing only what served his immediate survival. "The organization calls itself the Circle," he admitted, his earlier arrogance replaced by pragmatic cooperation. "A network of disgruntled engineers, corrupt patent officials, and foreign agents united by shared opposition to British technological dominance." Holmes leaned forward with intense interest. "And the recruitment methods?" "They identify brilliant men whose careers have stalled or whose financial circumstances have become desperate," Sterling explained. "They offer solutions: debt relief, professional advancement, access to cutting-edge research, in exchange for seemingly innocuous information. But once compromised, escape becomes virtually impossible." The scope of the conspiracy gradually emerged through Sterling's testimony. The vanishing compartment was merely one component of a systematic assault upon British industrial secrets, with similar modifications existing on trains serving Liverpool, Manchester, and Glasgow. Each mobile laboratory was designed to intercept sensitive documents during transit, photograph them with mechanical precision, and return them without victims ever realizing theft had occurred. Mysterious evidence. Holmes's examination of the laboratory's contents yielded discoveries that clearly troubled him more than he revealed. Within a locked metal chest bolted to the compartment's floor, he discovered 3 carefully wrapped bundles. The first contained brass cipher drums bearing naval coding sequences, evidence of the conspiracy's penetration into military communications. The second held sealed correspondence marked only with numbers and bearing wax seals impressed with an unfamiliar crest depicting an eagle clutching both anchor and lightning bolt. When Holmes unwrapped the third bundle, his expression grew momentarily unreadable. He examined its contents briefly before closing it again with decisive finality. "Additional technical specifications," he announced, though his tone carried undertones I had learned to associate with significant discoveries he preferred to verify privately before sharing. I observed him studying Sterling's face carefully during this examination, as though testing some private hypothesis. The criminal's reaction, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes, suggested Holmes had uncovered something of particular significance: the broader conspiracy. "Your testimony reveals only the operational structure," Holmes pressed, his keen eyes never leaving Sterling's face. "Who provides the technical expertise for such sophisticated modifications?" Sterling's composure wavered fractionally. "A German engineer named von Hessel developed the hydraulic systems, but the true architects of the Circle remain unknown to operational personnel. We receive instructions through intermediaries, payment through anonymous accounts. Even I have never met the individuals who ultimately direct our activities." Holmes rose and began pacing the confines of the small office, his mind clearly assembling these revelations into a broader strategic picture. "The psychological manipulation is perhaps more sophisticated than the technical apparatus," he observed. "By creating the illusion that compartments had never existed, you ensured that even successful thefts went unreported and uninvestigated." "Precisely," Sterling confirmed. "Victims questioned their own sanity rather than involving authorities. The vanishing compartment served dual purposes, providing workspace for document reproduction while creating such profound confusion that investigations were avoided entirely." Unresolved mysteries. As the morning progressed, Holmes grew increasingly thoughtful, studying the evidence with that peculiar intensity that suggested he perceived patterns beyond those immediately apparent. His examination of the laboratory's construction revealed modifications that seemed to exceed the requirements of simple document photography. "Watson," he murmured quietly, drawing my attention to a narrow outline barely visible in the compartment's rear wall. Observe this secondary access panel. Its dimensions suggest purposes beyond photographic equipment storage. Before I could respond, Inspector Finch approached with urgent news. "Mr. Holmes, we've received telegrams from Scotland Yard. 3 similar railway compartments have been discovered on other lines, but they were abandoned and partially dismantled. It appears the organization is systematically destroying evidence of their operations." Holmes's expression grew grimmer. "They move to cover their tracks even as we speak. Sterling's capture has triggered a comprehensive withdrawal, suggesting coordination and communication capabilities that extend far beyond a simple criminal enterprise." The investigation continues. As we prepared to return to London with our prisoner and the carefully documented evidence, Holmes remained uncharacteristically silent. The magnitude of what we had uncovered, a sophisticated network capable of systematic industrial espionage on a national scale, clearly weighed heavily upon his analytical mind. "The immediate mystery of the vanishing compartment has been resolved," he finally observed, watching the countryside pass through the train window. "Yet the larger questions remain unanswered. Who truly directs the Circle? What is their ultimate objective beyond simple theft of technical specifications? And what significance lies in those sealed documents that Sterling seemed so reluctant to discuss?" The rhythmic clatter of wheels upon rails provided a hypnotic accompaniment to these reflections as we carried our evidence and prisoner back toward London. The mystery of the Midnight Express had revealed itself as merely the visible manifestation of a far more complex conspiracy, one whose true scope and purpose remained tantalizingly beyond our grasp. Yet I maintained complete confidence that Holmes's relentless pursuit of truth would ultimately expose every thread of this elaborate criminal web, no matter how deeply its roots extended into the shadowy world of international espionage and industrial sabotage. The game had grown considerably more complex, but the master detective had never retreated from a challenge worthy of his extraordinary capabilities. The familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings provided a stark contrast to the mechanical violence and international intrigue we had so recently escaped. Holmes occupied his customary position before the fireplace, his long frame folded into the leather armchair with that peculiar grace of complete mental absorption. Upon the table lay the accumulated evidence of our extraordinary case. Sterling's deposition, the photographic plates recovered from the hidden laboratory, Professor Blackwood's technical analysis, and most significantly, the sealed correspondence bearing the distinctive eagle crest that had so troubled our captured conspirator. The cocaine bottle remained untouched upon the mantelpiece, a promising sign that the intellectual stimulation of the case had provided sufficient occupation for my friend's restless mind. Yet I detected in his manner a gravity that suggested our investigation had uncovered implications far beyond the immediate mystery of the vanishing compartment. "You perceive the complete picture now, Watson," Holmes began, his keen eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "What appeared to be an impossible supernatural phenomenon, a railway compartment that simply ceased to exist, resolves itself into the most methodically mechanical of conspiracies, executed with precision that would be admirable were it not directed toward such nefarious purposes." He rose and moved to the table, arranging the evidence with the careful attention of a surgeon preparing his instruments. The Circle's methodology depended upon 3 essential elements working in perfect coordination. First, advance intelligence regarding valuable documents in transit, supplied by their network of corrupted clerks in patent offices, legal firms, and railway companies, young Graves representing merely one tentacle of this far-reaching conspiracy. Holmes lifted one of the photographic plates, holding it to catch the gaslight. Second, they required temporary but complete control over specific railway carriages, permitting the substitution of ordinary compartments with their remarkable mobile laboratories. The hydraulic mechanisms we discovered were marvels of criminal engineering, capable of lowering genuine compartments onto auxiliary tracks, while simultaneously raising false bulkheads to conceal the photographic apparatus beneath. The psychological manipulation was perhaps their most sophisticated weapon, I observed, beginning to appreciate the conspiracy's true elegance. Precisely, Watson. By creating the illusion that compartments had never existed, they ensured that victims questioned their own sanity rather than immediately alerting authorities. Poor Pemberton's bewilderment was not merely unfortunate circumstance. It was the calculated result of deliberate deception designed to provide precious hours for document reproduction while preventing investigation. Holmes moved to his desk and withdrew the sealed correspondence, his expression growing progressively graver. Yet these documents revealed that industrial espionage was merely the visible manifestation of a far more sinister enterprise. The technical specifications they stole, naval propulsion systems, torpedo guidance mechanisms, encrypted communication protocols, were destined not for commercial competitors, but for the Imperial German Navy. The revelation struck with devastating force. What we had interpreted as criminal conspiracy was actually coordinated intelligence gathering by a foreign power, with the circles serving as intermediary between corrupted British subjects and German military authorities. The vanishing compartments, Holmes continued, his voice carrying unprecedented gravity, represented proof of concept for a technology with applications extending far beyond document theft. If they could install photographic laboratories undetected today, tomorrow they might transport explosives, incendiary devices, or sabotage equipment into the heart of Britain's industrial infrastructure without arousing suspicion. Before I could respond to these disturbing implications, Mrs. Hudson's familiar knock interrupted our conference. She entered bearing a telegram upon her silver tray, her expression suggesting urgent news. Holmes tore open the message, scanning its contents with rapid intensity before allowing the paper to flutter to the floor. "Sterling has been found dead in his Scotland Yard cell," he announced grimly. "Cyanide capsule concealed within a hollow tooth, a method suggesting military rather than criminal training. The Circle eliminates its liabilities with ruthless efficiency." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of London's evening traffic penetrating the fog-shrouded streets. Holmes moved to the window, his silhouette sharp against the amber glow of the gas lamps below. "The immediate threat has been neutralized," he observed, his voice carrying both satisfaction and concern. "The mobile laboratories are seized, the network exposed, and the stolen specifications recovered. Yet the true architects of this conspiracy remain concealed within shadows that even our investigation has not fully penetrated." He returned to his chair, reaching for his violin with the deliberate movements of a man seeking solace in familiar ritual. "My brother Mycroft must be informed immediately. This matter falls squarely within his governmental sphere. Certain diplomatic attachés will doubtless be recalled to their home countries, and the silent machinery of international relations will grind into motion to address these violations of sovereign trust." "Then the case is concluded?" I ventured, though Holmes's manner suggested otherwise. "The mystery of the Midnight Express is resolved in its immediate particulars," he replied, drawing the bow across the strings to produce a single, melancholy note. "The impossible compartment is explained through mechanical ingenuity rather than supernatural intervention. Mr. Pemberton's documents are recovered, the criminal apparatus dismantled, and justice, of a sort, has been served." He began to play a complex, brooding melody that seemed to capture the weight of knowledge that came with seeing further into the darkness than most men dared to look. "Yet I cannot escape the conviction that we have merely severed one tentacle of an organization whose body remains intact and dangerous. The Circle's resources, their technical expertise, their penetration of legitimate institutions, these suggest an enterprise operating on a scale that exceeds ordinary criminal conspiracy." The haunting notes filled our sitting room as Holmes lost himself in the music, his eyes closed in contemplation. When he finally lowered the instrument, His expression carried that mixture of satisfaction and frustration I had learned to associate with cases whose immediate mysteries were solved, but whose broader implications remained tantalizingly beyond complete resolution. "Record the facts, Watson," he said quietly, his gaze returning to the abaca evidence scattered across our table. "Tell your readers of the clever mechanical deception, the brilliant deduction, the dramatic pursuit across railway carriages in the fog-shrouded night, but perhaps preserve the details of German naval intelligence and sabotage preparations for your private archives. Some truths carry implications too grave for public consumption." He settled back into his chair, reaching for his pipe with the satisfied movements of a man who had successfully navigated treacherous waters. "When you write of this case, emphasize the triumph of rational analysis over apparent impossibility. The vanishing compartment seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physical reality, yet methodical observation revealed the mechanical truth beneath the supernatural facade." "And the broader conspiracy?" I asked. Holmes smiled, one of those thin expressions that combined triumph with acknowledgement of ongoing danger. "The game continues, my dear Watson, though we have gained significant advantage. The Circle's methodology is exposed, their network disrupted, and their immediate objectives thwarted. They will be forced to develop new approaches, and in doing so, they will inevitably provide fresh opportunities for detection and defeat." As the fog thickened beyond our windows and the familiar sounds of Baker Street settled into their nighttime rhythm, I reflected upon the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a single missing railway compartment door. From Pemberton's bewildered appeal to the revelation of international espionage, the case had demonstrated once again that beneath even the most impossible mysteries lay rational explanations awaiting discovery by sufficiently keen observation and methodical analysis. Holmes, for his part, seemed content to let the music speak where words would have been superfluous. Yet as he paused to adjust a string, he glanced toward me with that familiar expression of quiet satisfaction. "Remember this case well, Watson," he remarked, drawing the bow once more across the strings. "It demonstrates that the most sophisticated deceptions often depend upon the victim's willingness to doubt his own perceptions rather than question apparently authoritative sources. The Circle succeeded not through supernatural powers, but through mechanical precision combined with psychological manipulation." The violin's voice rose and trembled in the warm air of our rooms, carrying with it both the satisfaction of mystery solved and the sobering recognition that in the great game of nations, victory in one battle merely prepared the ground for conflicts yet to come. The mystery of the Midnight Express had been resolved, but somewhere in the fog-shrouded streets of London and the shadowy corridors of international intrigue, new mysteries were already taking shape, awaiting the moment when the game would once again be afoot. The familiar tranquility of Baker Street provided a welcome contrast to the mechanical violence and international intrigue that had consumed our recent days. Holmes had spent the better part of a week in consultation with his brother Mycroft, whose considerable influence within governmental circles permitted access to intelligence reports that revealed the true scope of what we had uncovered. When he finally returned from these shadowy conferences, his manner carried a gravity that suggested our investigation had exposed implications far beyond simple criminal conspiracy. The expanded revelation. "Watson," Holmes began, settling into his chair with uncharacteristic solemnity, "what I am about to reveal must remain absolutely confidential. The sealed correspondence we recovered contained evidence of an enterprise far more ambitious than mere document theft." He produced a leather portfolio bearing Professor Blackwood's distinctive handwriting. "The professor has made a discovery regarding the photographic apparatus that transforms our entire understanding of the Circle's objectives. The optical systems were designed not merely to photograph documents, but to produce printing plates capable of mass reproduction with perfect fidelity." The implications struck with devastating clarity. "They could create counterfeit specifications," I breathed, comprehending the sinister possibilities. "Precisely. Every stolen document could be weaponized, distributed to unsuspecting manufacturers who would unknowingly incorporate fatal flaws into their products, undermining Britain's industrial reliability while enriching those who possessed the genuine, unaltered designs. We confronted not merely thieves, but architects of systematic industrial sabotage. Holmes rose and moved to his desk, where foreign newspapers lay scattered with sections heavily marked in blue pencil. Observe how the Berliner Tageblatt devotes unusual energy to disproving the existence of German naval intelligence activity upon British soil. When a foreign power finds it necessary to inform the world that it has not committed particular indiscretions, one may be tolerably certain that it has either done so already or is upon the point of doing it. The broader conspiracy. Mycroft's investigations have revealed that the Circle was systematically recruiting British engineers and scientists for positions within German industrial establishments. Holmes continued, his voice carrying unprecedented gravity. 3 of Britain's most brilliant naval architects have accepted positions in Hamburg. The chief engineer from Armstrong Whitworth departed for Krupp last month. Each departure represents not merely lost expertise, but active transfer of knowledge to establishments that may one day produce weapons directed against British interests. The revelation transformed our understanding completely. What had appeared to be isolated criminal activity was actually coordinated, intelligence gathering by a foreign power, with the Circle serving as intermediary between corrupted British subjects and German military authorities. The vanishing compartments represented proof of concept for technology, with applications extending far beyond document theft. Holmes observed grimly. If they could install photographic laboratories undetected, tomorrow they might transport explosives, incendiary devices, or sabotage equipment into the heart of Britain's industrial infrastructure without arousing suspicion. Character resolutions. Yet amid these sobering revelations, certain aspects provided genuine satisfaction. Arthur Pemberton, restored to both sanity and commercial prospects, had responded with admirable patriotism. Rather than treating the affair as private calamity, he placed at the Admiralty's disposal, without thought of recompense, all results of his research. The patents were now held jointly under conditions that rendered their misuse by private interests impossible. The Circle has unwittingly created for Britain the very naval weapon it hoped to steal, Holmes observed with grim satisfaction. There is poetic justice in that. The enemy has strengthened the very power it sought to weaken. Sterling's fate had been sealed by his own organization's ruthless efficiency. The cyanide capsule concealed within his hollow tooth suggested military rather than criminal training, confirming that we had confronted not ordinary thieves, but trained operatives of a foreign intelligence service. Philosophical reflection. Holmes moved to the window, his sharp profile etched against the afternoon light. We are entering an era where the villain need not be present to commit the crime, Watson. The marriage of advanced engineering and espionage is in its infancy. I fear the 20th century will bring us crimes of such scientific sophistication that my simple methods of deduction will appear as antiquated as the dowsing rod. He returned to his chair, reaching for his pipe with the deliberate movements of a man processing profound implications. Consider how nearly their stratagem succeeded. Had not Pemberton possessed that rarest of qualities, obstinate confidence in his own senses, the vanishing compartment would have passed into the limbo of things half remembered and never investigated. The continuing game. As the fog began to lift beyond our windows, Holmes's expression carried both satisfaction at our investigative success and awareness of ongoing dangers. The immediate threat has been neutralized, yet the methodology remains viable. Mycroft estimates similar networks may operate throughout Europe, each targeting the industrial secrets of rival nations in what amounts to undeclared technological warfare. He settled back into his chair, reaching for his violin with characteristic grace. Record the facts, Watson, but perhaps preserve certain details. The weaponized, Specifications, the systematic recruitment, the scope of foreign infiltration for your private archives until time and circumstance permit their revelation without precipitating international crisis. As Holmes began to play a complex, contemplative melody, I reflected upon the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a single, impossible disappearance. The mystery of the Midnight Express had demonstrated once again that beneath even the most supernatural mysteries lay rational explanations awaiting discovery by sufficiently keen observation and methodical analysis. The case was closed, yet the game continued. Somewhere in the fog-shrouded streets of London and the shadowy corridors of international intrigue, new mysteries were already taking shape, awaiting the moment when the game would once again be afoot. The November gales descended upon London with vindictive fury, transforming Baker Street into a river of reflected gaslight and hurrying figures beneath umbrellas. Within our familiar lodgings, Holmes occupied his customary position before the crackling fire, surrounded by newspapers and correspondence that had accumulated during the 3 weeks since our resolution of the Midnight Express affair. The immediate excitement had subsided, yet I detected in his manner a thoughtful gravity that suggested the case had revealed implications extending far beyond a single vanishing compartment. "Watson," Holmes began suddenly, setting aside the chemical treatise he had been studying, "I have been remiss in explaining certain aspects of our investigation that propriety prevented me from discussing while events remained fluid. The sealed correspondence we discovered, those documents bearing the eagle crest that so troubled Sterling, contained communications between the Circle's leadership and individuals whose names would be recognized in the highest circles of British society. The revelation struck with unexpected force. You mean respectable businessmen were unwittingly financing industrial espionage? Precisely. The Circle's architects understood that the most effective conspiracies are those where the majority of participants remain ignorant of the enterprise's true nature. By creating layers of legitimate commercial activity concealing the criminal core, they ensured that even thorough investigation would reveal only innocent dupes rather than conscious conspirators. Holmes rose and moved to his desk, producing a telegram that bore the Admiralty's distinctive seal. Professor Blackwood reports that Pemberton's electrical propulsion system has been successfully tested aboard a prototype vessel. The technology proves revolutionary, silent running capabilities that transform naval warfare's fundamental assumptions. What the Circle sought to steal has instead become Britain's strategic advantage. The irony was profound. The conspiracy that had seemed so threatening had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened British naval supremacy, transforming private innovation into national asset through the very attention their theft had attracted. There is a lesson here, Holmes mused, returning to his chair. Criminal enterprises, however sophisticated, contain within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. The Circle's audacity ensured their eventual exposure. Had they employed conventional theft, their activities might have continued indefinitely without detection. Our conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Hudson's arrival with the Evening Post, which included a small, heavy packet wrapped in official Admiralty paper. Holmes accepted it with characteristic indifference, tossing it casually toward my chair. Another token of gratitude from officialdom, no doubt. You may examine it, Watson. I carefully broke the seal to reveal a magnificent emerald tie pin, accompanied by a letter expressing the Crown's profound gratitude for services rendered in preserving naval supremacy. Holmes, this represents extraordinary recognition. Put it with the snuff-box from the King of Bohemia, he replied dismissively. My reward lies in the work itself, the beautiful, impossible paradox of a thing that both was and was not there. The awareness that a particular chain of events, which might have ended in disaster, instead reached satisfactory conclusion because one mind applied itself rigorously to available facts. Holmes moved to the window, his angular profile etched against the storm-darkened glass. The world is changing, Watson. The crime of the future will not be the bludgeon in the dark alley, but the silent theft of ideas, the mathematical manipulation of reality. The Midnight Express was but a harbinger, an age where the criminal will be an engineer, and the detective must become a scientist. And yet, I ventured, joining him at the window, so long as the human heart remains capable of greed and deceit, surely the fundamental nature of your work remains unchanged. Holmes turned with one of his rare, fleeting smiles. You are the one fixed point in a changing age, my dear fellow. Your faith in human nature's permanence keeps me from complete cynicism. The players may change their costumes, the stage may be fitted with electric lights rather than gas, but the play remains eternal. He reached for his violin, drawing the bow across the strings to produce a resonant chord that harmonized with the wind howling outside. What troubles me most profoundly is not what we discovered, but what we failed to discover. The true architects of the circle remain concealed within shadows our investigation could not penetrate. Somewhere in Berlin or Vienna, engineers are already designing improved versions, mobile laboratories more sophisticated, deceptions more subtle. But we have gained crucial advantages, I observed. The methodology is documented, vulnerabilities identified, countermeasures implemented. Indeed, when they strike again, and they shall, we will be prepared. Holmes began to play a complex, triumphant melody that seemed to drive back the shadows and cold. Record the facts, Watson, but preserve certain details for your private archives. Some truths carry implications too grave for immediate public consumption. As the haunting notes filled our sitting room, I reflected upon the extraordinary journey from Pemberton's bewildered arrival to the exposure of international conspiracy. The mystery of the Midnight Express had demonstrated once again that no deception, however elaborate, could ultimately withstand methodical observation and unwavering pursuit of truth. The game continues, as it always does, Holmes concluded, his eyes bright with familiar anticipation. Somewhere in this great city, new mysteries await. When they present themselves as inexplicable miracles, I trust you will once more be at my side. You may depend upon it, I answered, knowing that whatever mechanical marvels or scientific deceptions the future might bring, the principles of detection would remain constant and the game would forever be afoot.